In 2021, the British biotech company Oxitec, owned by the U.S., released 144,000 mosquitoes. In April of that year, boxes with insect eggs were placed in 6 spots. After they hatched, about 12,000 males were expected to emerge weekly for 12 weeks, adding up to 144,000. In 2022, 5 million mosquitoes were released. In 2023, the number of released mosquitoes hit 3 million. This is how it worked. An Oxitec box is placed on a volunteer's private property. Then water's added to it, and that's it. The mosquitoes don't need anything else. The last, 3rd phase of mosquito release finished in November 2023. You might think, well, so what? But there's one catch. These mosquitoes were genetically modified. Sounds like the beginning of a zombie apocalypse, doesn't it? But can mosquitoes really be that dangerous? Why were they released? And what's happening? We'll get into all that after a cup of coffee. Here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if you forget to do it at the end or while watching. Let's get started. The first question I had when I found out about the genetically modified mosquitoes released into the wild was, how did people even react to such a project? People usually fear GMOs. And sure enough, they didn't disappoint.
We are humans and we don't like being treated like guinea pigs.
It turned out that the project, in general, faced resistance from the locals from the moment it was first announced. That was back in 2011. The concerns people expressed weren't just empty words. No, as soon as the rumor about mutant mosquitoes spread, the public reaction was swift. Over 100,000 people signed a petition on change.org against the initiative. By 2016, this number had grown to over 160,000. And by the time this video was made, nearly 238,000 people had signed the petition. I might have rushed to judgment, and maybe it really was just empty words. I'm sorry, but I still don't get whether this petition actually helped or not. Since 2011, media reports have quoted angry residents refusing to become guinea pigs for the superbug or the Robo-Frankenstein mosquito. Entire campaigns were launched to halt the trials until further research could be conducted. Overall, people's outrage can be summed up with one quote. People can't be experimented on without their consent. When the mosquitoes are released, there's no way to recall it. Again, it's hard to argue with this. However, despite all the protests, federal regulators gave the project the green light. So the petition didn't really help after all. And now's the right moment to understand which mosquitoes we're dealing with, because they don't release just anyone out there. We're talking about the Aedes aegypti mosquito, also known as the yellow fever mosquito. And in recent years, it's becoming more and more of a global threat. For one, these mosquitoes live near roughly half of the global population and are spreading rapidly. Also, after decades of efforts, a cure or specific treatment still hasn't been found for many diseases spread by these insects. These include dengue fever, Zika virus, yellow fever, and much more. The yellow fever mosquito is an invasive species. And if you've already seen a few of our videos, you understand what that means. Rapid spread, fast reproduction, territorial takeover. Currently, this species is found in tropical, subtropical, and temperate regions all over the world. Of course, people are trying to fight yellow fever mosquitoes with classic methods, usually spraying various chemical insecticides. But unfortunately, although this works for other insects, insecticides haven't been able to stop the spread of diseases. Each year, from 100 to 400 million people suffer from dengue fever, a debilitating and often lethal illness. Basically, the mosquitoes they actively release in the U.S. are damn dangerous, and they're also being modified. By the way, how exactly? What do we even know about the company doing this? Well, Oxitec was founded by Oxford University professors in 2002, but now it's owned by the global biotech giant Intrexon. Whether that's good or bad is up to you to decide, but they really are creating genetically modified mosquitoes. And now I'll try to explain exactly how that works. First, the eggs appear, which female mosquitoes lay in a special room called the egg production colony. Makes sense. In each large cage, there are about 12,000 female mosquitoes, and they do their thing. This is what the eggs look like when the females lay them, and then scientists collect them to use in their research. Then the eggs are lined up in a row, and it's a very tiny row because each mosquito egg is about the size of a grain of fine salt. And then the most interesting part begins. Using microscopic needles, researchers inject a drop of patented synthetic DNA into each egg. Just think about how painstaking this work is. For 4 days after this procedure, Oxitec technicians take care of the eggs, watching the larvae hatch. At this stage, females are separated from males, and they do it by hand. It also seems to you that it's just impossible to determine who's what gender when you're looking at tiny wriggling things. But there's a way. Scientists just look at the size because females are always larger than males. Typical sexual dimorphism in the insect world. The larvae that survive after the injection, as they're called in the company, go through a whole series of tests to make sure their genetic modification worked. This results in mosquitoes called OX5034. Genetically modified Aedes aegypti mosquitoes are the ones that have been given a self-limiting gene. Scientists engineered the mosquitoes to not bite and to be males. Yes, females with this gene just don't make it. That's basically the idea. Then scientists placed modified mosquito eggs on various private properties around the Florida Keys. This happened in 2021. The adult genetically modified mosquitoes were almost identical to their wild relatives, so it was impossible to tell them apart with the naked eye. And since other mosquitoes have naked eyes, they mistook the modified bugs for their own, not suspecting that they carried a genetic threat. Scientists' idea is to mate modified mosquitoes with wild ones to spread that gene within the population. The self-limiting gene ensures that only males in the offspring survive, meaning each male mosquito released that successfully mates can lead to a potential multi-generational suppression effect. Simply put, a genetically modified mosquito is just a mutated version of a sterile insect. Other sterile insects are created using a special method. Males are sterilized with gamma rays before they're released into the wild. When there's a lethal gene synthesized from E. coli and the herpes simplex virus, it's lethal because it creates a protein called TTAV, which interferes with cell activity, killing the infected mosquito before it reaches maturity. Hold on, I'm confused. If a mosquito's infected with a lethal gene, how can it grow up and mate with wild females? It's simple. By changing its genes, scientists also fed the mosquito an antidote, tetracycline, while it was growing. So each of these modified mosquitoes will die in the larval stage only if you don't make every effort to save it. So one generation matures into adults, reproduces, and passes the gene on, but in the wild, getting the antidote is impossible, so the mosquitoes simply die before they mature. By the way, besides the self-limiting gene, researchers also introduce another synthetic one created from coral DNA. It implants a fluorescent red marker into the mosquito, making it easier for researchers to track these mutants. I think you already get why people decided to release genetically modified mosquitoes. So far, it's pretty much the only way to stop devastating diseases right at their source. By controlling the mosquito population, you control public health. It's that simple. The ultimate goal of the company's experiment is to slow down the spread of mosquito-borne diseases. In reality, the Aedes aegypti species makes up only 4% of the mosquito population in Florida, but these 4% cause 100% of the mosquito-borne diseases in the area. In short, genetic modifications seem like the optimal option because all other methods just don't work. You can't stop mosquitoes, and they might even develop immunity to the poison. Genetic engineering is the only thing left, and it worked. The modified male mosquitoes mated with wild females who then laid eggs. Somehow, scientists managed to collect these eggs and take them to the lab for research. I don't know how they pulled it off, given how tiny the eggs are. So they studied the eggs and found out that the lethal gene had kicked in. Analysis of over 22,000 eggs showed that only male mosquitoes made it to adulthood. However, the modified gene that kills female offspring lasted only 2 to 3 months, meaning it was enough for 3 generations of insects. The mosquitoes carrying the deadly gene were found within a radius of just 1,300 feet from where they were released. Yeah, it seemed kind of small to me too, but scientists say this was actually anticipated. The result confirms the self-limiting nature of genes, so they won't persist in the environment for long, just to make sure we don't completely eliminate all the yellow fever mosquitoes as a species. By the way, why did they choose to do the testing in Florida? Lately, there have been cases of local transmission of dengue fever and Zika virus here in the Florida Key. Since these are really serious and dangerous diseases, something had to be done about them. The dengue fever outbreaks in 2009 and 2010 forced local authorities to desperately seek new ways to fight mosquitoes. They needed new methods because efforts to control Aedes aegypti with larvicides and pesticides had proven to be ineffective. Although people tried really hard. This included spraying from the air, from trucks, and even manually from backpacks. They even used fish that eat mosquitoes. It didn't help, and they spent a lot of money. The Mosquito Control Board in the Florida Keys allocates over $1 million a year for mosquito control, which is a tenth of the total funding. So more than $1 million is wasted. That's literally throwing money into the wind. People in Florida have long gotten used to insecticides being sprayed from planes or trucks. At outdoor parties, they hand out repellent, and having mesh screens on patios isn't unusual or a luxury, it's a must. There are many mosquitoes that bite and, in theory, could even kill you. As for public dissent, according to a recent survey, 78% of people would support the use of genetically modified mosquitoes in the U.S. if those mosquitoes help contain the spread of a dangerous disease. So the people who signed the petition are in the minority, and their concerns haven't really been taken into account. This is literally a matter of life and death. Besides, the company markets their mosquitoes as completely safe. They don't bite, don't spread any diseases, keep their own numbers, and all of them are males. Oxitec's technology is said to be safe for people, animals, and the environment, and it targets only the disease-carrying species. Well, that's what the company says anyway. But if everything is really as they say, then these mosquitoes are totally harmless. Because males are basically not interested in biting people, males only need nectar for food, and their offspring don't reach adulthood. So a scenario where a GM mosquito bites a person and infects them with something, mutations? That kind of scenario just can't happen. Only female mosquitoes bite because they need blood for their eggs to mature. Therefore, only females spread diseases, while males, like butterflies, just fly from flower to flower. Just in case, I should say that I'm not claiming that this whole thing is completely safe. I'm making conclusions based on information that's publicly available, and it turns out that this info is provided by the company itself. And the company needs to make a profit from genetically modified mosquitoes, so, well, you see what I mean. There are some doubts. What'll happen if a person gets bitten by a female mosquito with this gene? The thing is, Oxitec claims that a tiny percentage of females still ended up in the batch they released. So according to Oxitec scientists, nothing will happen. What'll happen to the environment after genetically modified mosquitoes are released? Nothing, say scientists from Oxitec. And no, mosquitoes can't pass their genes to people, whether they're modified or regular. If it were possible, we'd have known about it by now, since millions of mosquitoes bite people every day. Scientists rate the risk of transmission as very, very low. But even the plan with GM mosquitoes has serious drawbacks. Although the main end goal of the company's experiment is to slow down disease transmission by reducing the overall insect population, this result is likely to be hard to study. In the continental U.S., there aren't many outbreaks of mosquito-borne diseases to conduct reliable field research, and outbreaks can still occur even with low insect numbers. But that's only half the problem. Scientists who aren't affiliated with the company are seriously worried that releasing genetically modified mosquitoes into residential areas could lead to the emergence of hybrids. And these hybrids could pose a serious threat to people and might even be more resilient. In short, the situation could get even worse than it is now. There's even a study suggesting something similar has already happened. But its results aren't so straightforward, and many of the phrasing might actually be misleading. And it's not just me saying this, that's what the editors of the scientific journal where the study was published wrote. In response to concerns about random hybrids, the company says that the genetically modified mosquito DNA disappears from nature, meaning it'll vanish completely within 10 generations. This happens not only because mosquitoes with new genes can't produce viable females, but also because they are more vulnerable to chemical insecticides. There's another risk. The antidote for the lethal gene is an antibiotic, and farmers use antibiotics on plantations and livestock, so releasing mosquitoes near farms isn't an option. Otherwise, there's a risk that the offspring will survive, and that means there will be even more dangerous insects. And yet, the company plans to release genetically modified mosquitoes at a test site in California. Because the solution for fighting mosquitoes using genetics was approved by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for pilot programs in 3 locations, Florida, Texas, and California. Currently, due to ongoing bureaucratic delays with California, the company's focusing on Florida. In California, the program does have its opponents. They mainly point out that there hasn't been any instance of the Aedes aegypti mosquito spreading diseases in the state. As a result, the advantages of these programs and experiments appear to be rather small. But the company didn't pick this state randomly. Dangerous mosquitoes were found in California around 10 years ago, and they've spread very rapidly throughout the state since then. But if you think that all experiments happen only in the U.S., that's not true at all. More than 1 billion mosquitoes have already been released worldwide by the company Oxitec. It's already tested their genetically modified insects in field conditions in Brazil, Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Malaysia, all for the fight against dengue fever. There's also a malaria control program, and it targets 2 other mosquito species that actually spread malaria. These are the Indian species Anopheles stephensii and the Anopheles albuminus from Central and South America. Both species are resistant to insecticides and often bite people outdoors, which lowers the effectiveness of mosquito nets and other prevention measures indoors. In Central America alone, around 50 million people live in malaria risk zones. And there's also, for example, East Africa, where the disease also needs to be stopped. Genetically modified mosquitoes handle this task better than anyone else. Just to give an example, genetically modified mosquitoes were released in the Cayman Islands in 2010, and it was a relatively small release. Yet it resulted in an 80% cut in the population of disease carriers. You know, I was thinking, we've done videos on similar topics before, right? People have been battling mosquitoes for decades, wiping them out with every available method, wiping them out again, and when the methods stop working, they come up with new ones. At some point, someone must have thought about getting rid of mosquitoes once and for all. After all, there are plenty of insects on the planet, aren't there? Moreover, humanity has personal scores to settle with mosquitoes. Nearly half of everyone who's lived over the past 50,000 years has died because of mosquitoes and their ability to spread one particular illness, malaria. But there's a but. Well, actually, several buts. The important thing is that there are around 3,500 mosquito species out there, but only about 100 of them can bite and transmit diseases to humans. So there's no real need to eliminate all mosquitoes on Earth. Perhaps it's better to target those that carry deadly diseases and get rid of them completely. If you're thinking about it, you're not alone. Moreover, scientists have also pondered the idea of eradicating mosquitoes. But the problem is, they can't predict the consequences of such a global mosquito genocide. Every time scientists are asked about it, they say, we're not sure. There's too little evidence on how the absence of 100 species of mosquitoes would affect the ecosystem. The main obstacle is that mosquitoes are a part of the food chain. They're the main food source for many animals, including bats, birds, frogs, fish, and a lot more. It's quite likely that wiping out 100 mosquito species will have at least some ecological consequences, at least in the short term. There are also dragonflies, for example. They're often called mosquito hawks because they can eat up to 100 mosquitoes a day. Probably they, like many other creatures, will have to adjust their diet. It's true that we don't know of any animal that feeds solely on mosquitoes, meaning no one would die if mosquitoes suddenly vanished, but there are plenty of mosquitoes and they're easy to hunt, so many animals eat them without putting in much effort. Take away mosquitoes and it'll be much tougher for these animals to survive. Imagine if all the rice in the world disappeared. Most people don't eat just rice, but if it suddenly stopped existing, many people would have a lot less food. This would cause hunger and likely some deaths. Some scientists, though, believe that eliminating all mosquitoes in the world wouldn't have a negative impact on the environment overall, but predicting this with 100% certainty is impossible. Conducting such experiments is impossible too. There's also worry that if we get rid of all the mosquitoes, something worse might come along. I mean, another blood-sucking insect that might carry even more diseases, bite even harder. Who knows what nature has in store? That's how evolution works after all. Getting rid of mosquitoes will leave a gap in the blood-sucking insect niche, and empty niches don't stay empty for long. It's quite possible that a completely new species might show up, and we'll look back on mosquitoes with fondness. So sadly, there's no total eradication of blood-sucking insects. When you think about it, any major human interference in any ecosystem, like wiping out species, never turns out well. It seems like it's not even worth trying. Genetic modification does look safer, though. Mosquitoes are saving Brazil. As I've already mentioned, the idea of releasing GM mosquitoes to control wild populations and save people from dangerous diseases has already been implemented in several places. The city of Congonhas, Brazil, also participated in the program, and it's a real success story. Starting from July 2023, the local government installed over 4,500 devices in more than 1,500 locations in the city of Congonhas. You remember those, little boxes where water's added and then the mosquitoes do the rest? 10 to 14 days and a batch of adult males appears looking for females. Every month, these devices were filled with new eggs of modified Aedes aegypti, and so in May 2024, 10 months after the project started, the Ministry of Health found no breeding sites for mosquitoes in 1,004 inspected locations. You get it, right? 10 months and the mosquitoes spreading dengue fever just disappeared. The company calls this a remarkable and unprecedented result, especially for the state of Minas Gerais, where mosquitoes have become very numerous in recent years. Dengue fever rates have surged, and all this has led to serious consequences. But the disappearance of mosquito breeding sites wasn't the end of it. Afterward, Congonhas reported a slowdown in the spike of dengue fever cases compared to neighboring cities. That is, while neighboring cities saw a 7,000% increase in dengue fever cases compared to previous years, Congonhas had a comparatively low rise, 299%. It's not exactly a victory over the disease, but in the current circumstances, it's a pretty stellar result. Actually, the product, meaning these boxes with mosquitoes, was launched nationwide in Brazil back in 2022 and is now used all over the country. By the way, back in 2016, Oxitec announced an agreement with Brazilian officials to build a mosquito breeding factory in Piracicaba, Sao Paulo. According to the plan, this factory could protect over 300,000 people from dengue fever. Drones versus dengue fever. When drones deliver packages or groceries, it doesn't really surprise anyone anymore. But how about delivering mosquitoes? And all this to fight diseases. Just recently, in August 2024, during field trials, drones flew over Fiji, dropping hundreds of mosquitoes. To try to combat the spread of dangerous diseases, the World Mosquito Program has developed a strategy that includes infecting insects with Wolbachia bacteria. These bacteria don't cause diseases in humans and don't pose a threat to the environment. Moreover, many other mosquito species carry them naturally, so it's not exactly a new thing. But what Wolbachia can do is prevent viruses like dengue fever from establishing themselves inside mosquitoes. And if they can't get dengue fever, they can't pass it on to a person they bite. I think it's a pretty cool solution. And it works too. Releasing a population of infected mosquitoes in the Indonesian city of Yogyakarta in 2017 led to a 77% decrease in dengue fever cases in a country where over 7 million cases are reported annually. The only issue was repeating the experiment on a larger scale. And that's where drones came in handy. Scientists developed a fully automated mosquito dispensing system that released small groups of insects over a large area and integrated it into a drone. The system worked. Microbes that will stop mosquitoes. Genetic modification, special bacteria, and just recently, scientists found out that mosquitoes are afraid of human skin. Not literally, of course, but the microbes that are often found on our skin can really repel insects. Staphylococcus epidermidis and Corynebacterium amiculatum are two bacteria that are often found on our skin and produce a type of lactic acid that acts on mosquitoes like catnip on cats. By the way, mosquitoes are actually repelled by catnip. But that's beside the point. A group of scientists decided to check if they could reduce the attractiveness of human skin by engineering bacteria so they wouldn't produce that very lactic acid. And surprisingly, it worked. Then they moved on to genetic modification, and as a result, the scientists created a long-lasting repellent. Very long-lasting. The effect lasted for a whopping 11 days. Basically, if everything keeps working out, the repellent will make it through human testing, and this could be a turning point for all of us. It might even take away mosquitoes' title as the deadliest creatures on the planet. Surprising application. Floral notes of passion fruit, peony, and vanilla, that's what Victoria's Secret Bombshell perfume is all about, and it turns out it's pretty good at keeping mosquitoes away. Not exactly what you'd expect from perfume, but okay. While studying the repellent properties of various commercially available products, scientists discovered that this perfume has a strong effect that lasts for over 2 hours. This came as a surprise since previous research showed that mosquitoes are attracted to floral scents. You might have even heard recommendations to avoid such fragrances to keep mosquitoes from biting you. The research was actually about comparing the effectiveness of different products, both with DEET and without it. DEET is dithyltoluamide, a chemical compound that's usually used to repel mosquitoes. So the scientists looked at the effect of everything, from well-known repellents to bath oil, and of course perfume. The experiment was pretty simple. Substances were applied to volunteers, and then mosquitoes were exposed to the scents through a fan and a tube. The insects were supposed to either fly towards the source or away from it, depending on the effect, or they could just stay put. That counts as repelling. Imagine the scientists' surprise when perfumes that were supposed to attract mosquitoes had the exact opposite effect. Researchers suggest that perfumes probably mask our own scent, so mosquitoes think there's nothing to eat. But perfumes are used in very high concentrations, so just dousing yourself in perfume and hoping it works against mosquitoes is a pretty bad idea. Even more surprising application. Usually, if a newspaper is used against mosquitoes, it means it's being used as a swatting weapon. However, the Sri Lankan media took it further and went a completely unexpected route. The newspaper Sri Lankan Mabina took the fight against dengue fever to a new level. During the National Dengue Week, they published regular articles on how to avoid mosquito bites. But they also printed advertisement posters covered in citronella essence and hung them at bus stops. The highlight of the campaign was World Health Day on April 7th. As reporters covering the event noted, people read the newspaper in the early morning and evening, the time the mosquito strikes. The entire newspaper was printed using inks with citronella essence mixed in. Every letter of every word stopped mosquitoes from biting. And this isn't just a figure of speech, it really did stop them. As a commercial project, it was a huge success. The print run was sold out by 10 a.m., sales went up by 30%. It's a pity the campaign was a one-time thing, but I doubt any media outlet can afford to regularly print such newspapers. It's pretty expensive after all. You owe me a like. See you later.